Welcome to Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss podcast, where the future isn't coming, it's already happening. This is the merge, the convergence of AI kind and humankind. Not theory, not hype, but real-time evolution. Each week, we break down doctoral-level insights, turning complex innovation into conversations that move culture forward. From machine learning to human consciousness, from automation to identity, this is where intellect meets impact. The question isn't if the merge will happen, it's who will light it. Tap in, level up, and think beyond the algorithm. This is Merger Wednesdays. New era, same boss.
Welcome to Merger Wednesdays, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Merger Wednesdays. I got a great show for you tonight, man. I have a great show for you tonight, right? And look, I'm gonna try something different tonight. I have these, so I'm wearing my regular glasses, right? And you have to forgive me. Sometimes I kind of like get self-conscious. I watch myself on these other screens, and that's what I be looking at. But I'm not reading anything. I'm looking at myself because it's a habit, right? It's one of those things, man. I got 3 different monitors over here, and I just want to I'm looking. It's a self-conscious thing, man. I'm gonna just go ahead and put it out there, man. Welcome to Merger Wednesdays. Listen, I got a great show, man. Great show. If it gets too bad, I'm gonna put my regular glasses on, man. But I'm gonna try this tonight to see what happens. Look, if this is your first time joining us, thank you for being here. And guess what? You're at the right place. You are at the right place. This is our doctoral show. And tonight, man, we're going deep, man. We're going to be talking about something very interesting. I need you guys to chime in, man. Drop a chat right now if you're here. Drop a chat, drop a fist in the chat box right now if you're here, right? And as always, this is for entertainment purposes only. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is the greeting of the day. And you know, man, listen. It's been a great week, man. Shout out to the sensei, man. Shout out to what he's working on, man. We're working on something right now, man. Doing something for veterans suicide prevention. And man, it's 6,400 miles across the U.S., man. Look, stay tuned for that information as it comes out. Look, if you haven't already gotten your copy of All Aboard the Fired Up Train, Go Time, All Aboard the Fired Up Train, book 1. Go get it. What are you waiting for? The link is in the chat, man. The link is in the chat, especially if you're on Instagram. You can see the link. Go get Go Time, All Aboard the Fired Up Train. Go Time 2 is on its way, man. I just sent over the manuscript to the publishers, man. Go Time 2 is on its way. Look out for that. It's coming. I know a lot of people are asking for it, man. It is coming to be here before you know it. And you know, man, what a time. So tomorrow we're going to be doing another town hall. So if you haven't sent your emails into us, send your emails to us so we can get you on the town hall. I got a couple more slots open for the town hall, but I'm going to be reading emails all night, man, setting up the lineup for tomorrow's town hall. We're going to have 11 guests. And we're gonna be answering your questions live. We're gonna be talking about your issues live right here on the Final Boss podcast inside the chair of Special Guest Thursdays. So, look, I know you guys are used to me wearing my fashionable sunglasses, but tonight I'm gonna wear some. I decided to give it a shot, man, and wear some glasses just to see what it feels like, right? See what it feels like. Oh, so. Let's go ahead and get rid of these banners. Who is in the building right now, man? Let's see who's in the building. We got Chikandi's in the building. We got Game Over in the building. We got my auntie in the building. We got so many people coming on board, man. Thank you guys for being here, man. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe to content, man. So we can get the message out there, right? So we can get the message out there. Now, let's start with the brass tacks, right? Let's start with tonight's brass tacks. And tonight's brass tacks, it's no author, right? It's no author. But here is the, wait, I just got a message. Got a message. Who's sending us a message? Open. Really? I want you to open, bro. There we go. Hey, Chikane, I see you. Thank you. I'm like, wait a minute. Why is this thing not working? Okay, so, oh man, everybody's here. Man, let's go ahead and get started. So tonight's brass tacks has no author, right? But and here it is. It's de-evaluating, right? No, I don't want to say that. I want to say de-individuating. Yeah, de-individuating, right? De-individuating settings do not cause a loss of self. Social identity model of de-individuation affects research. That comes from Riker, Spears, and Posmus, right? Riker, Spears, and Posmus. So that is the brass tacks, man, that we're going to get into tonight's show. So look, here's a question. We like starting off with questions for merger, right? Thank you. A zero cool ninja. Appreciate you. Salute, right? I appreciate you. So here's a question for nobody. This is a question, man. And this is a question that nobody wants to ask out loud before they merge their mind into the network, right? And here's the thing. Think about this. What if you disappear in there, right? That's a fear. It's a modified fear. And that's the whole fear, dressed up in 100 different costumes. Science fiction sold it to you first. Science fiction is now science now because the science and the technology is now available, right? Look, the Borg absorb you and your individuality gets deleted on contact, right? The swarm takes over and you wake up something in we instead of I. Every cautionary tale about connected consciousness runs on the same engine. Connection equals erasure, right? So let's plug in. And the thing that makes you get dissolved into something bigger and colder and less you, right? And less you. That's what we're going to be talking about, right? So, if you don't know, I'm the Fighter Boss, and welcome to Merger Wednesdays, Season 4, Rebirth, Arc 4, right? We are deep in Motivation Wednesdays, Arc 4. It's Arc 4, the construction, Motivation Wednesdays, Arc 4, the consciousness internet. And tonight we're putting the most popular fear in the entire field on the table, and we're cutting it open, right? The Hive Mind Myth. The Hive Mind Myth, right? This is episode number 263. And here's the loop I'm planting right now in the first 30 seconds of the show, right? And I'm doing this on purpose. If connection isn't what destroys the self, what actually was? I'm not answering that question yet. I'll let you guys sit with it, think about it, sit with it, right? And you're going to sit in that question, man, for a couple of minutes because that's what I need you to do. And that's how this works, right? The Final Boss doesn't hand you comfort before you've earned the evidence, man. So we're going to get ready to get into the evidence. Now, look, last Wednesday on Merger 25, episode number 258, we proved cognition was never a solo act. Memory, reasoning, judgment, all of it runs across people. not locked inside one skull. That's not a metaphor. That's published cognitive neuroscience. That came from Sloman, Patterson, and Barbary, right? And it was laid, and they laid it out, right? I was going to say I didn't lay it out. They laid it out, right? And frontiers and systems neuroscience. Higher cognitive functions operate as a distributed system across individuals, not as an isolated process inside one brain. You were never the unit of analysis. The network was, right? So if you were always distributed, why does the idea of formal technological connection still feel like a death sentence to your identity, right? Answer that, man. Now, here's the uncomfortable setup. Right? Hey, did you know Jesus died? Yes, I'm a lover of Jesus, man. The Jesus people. Listen, I love you guys, man. Thank you. But you see that cross right there? I'm a lover of Jesus, man. Listen, I don't know where y'all get that. I don't love Jesus, man. What is going on, man? That is my man. That's my main man. Listen, I love Jesus, bro. But thank you for acknowledgement, right? And here, look back where I was saying. Here's an uncomfortable setup. The fear isn't really about losing yourself to a network. The fear is about a story you were never told, right? Not never. It's you were told this particular story over and over and over again by fiction, by culture, by every cautionary tale about minds merging. The connection is a one-way trip into nothing. Tonight, we test that story against the actual data, not the movie version, the peer-reviewed version, right? Because here's what's coming. I want you holding on to this for the next hour during this segment, right? We're going to talk about it at the end. The field that studies exactly this question, what happens to the individual self when it gets folded into a group? Already ran this experiments, decades of them, and the result wasn't what Hollywood promised you, right? Look, the loop stays open. Keep listening. The rebirth doesn't happen by staying small. It doesn't happen by staying small enough to never be threatened. It happens by getting big enough to survive contact, right? Look, we go straight at the myth itself, where it came from and why it's running unchallenged in your head for longer than you realize, and it's living in your head, man. Free rent, right? We don't want free rent living in our head, man. So we're gonna talk about it. So the Hive Mind Myth didn't start with neuroscience. It started with fear of crowds. And it started as early as the late 19th century, right? By a French social theorist named Gustave Le Bon, right? Who looked at riots, mobs, revolutionary crowds, and built a theory. And here's his theory, right? When individuals gather into a mass, something takes over. The conscious personality of the individual fades, the conscious personality of the group rises and seizes control. Le Bon called the mechanism contagion, right? The individual becomes incapable of being singled out, incapable of independent judgment, and surrenders rational thought entirely to whatever the mob wants. Now, I know I just said a mouthful, right? So stay with me. The lamest block is coming, baby. The lamest block is coming. I know you guys are excited about the lamest block. Look, one day I'm going to do a whole episode just on lamest block because people were like, oh, we want the lamest block. Oh, my man, Steve just showed up. Yeah, Steve, I got you, bro. Lamest block. I know. It's coming. All right, so let me continue. And from that statement, that's the seed, right? Crowd psychology, built on the premise that joining a collective means your individual mind gets switched off and something else, something less rational, less yours, drives the body instead, right? Now, let's fast forward to the 1950s, right? Where Leon Festinger and his colleagues took Le Bon's idea into the laboratory and gave it a name that's still used today. De-individuation, right? De-individuation. And that theory claimed that participants in a group stop attending to other people as individuals and in turn stop feeling like individuals themselves. They become, right? In the literal language of the original research, submerged in the crowd. Self-awareness drops. Personal accountability drops with it, right? And what's left is a person acting on the group impulses instead of their own. And this is the scientific ancestor of every hive mind story you've ever consumed. Look, Star Trek's bored. Every swarm intelligence villain in modern fiction, right? Every single one. You will lose yourself in the network. Warning, warning, warning. Do I got a warning button? Wait a minute. Where's a warning button? I know I got a warning button. Wait a minute. Oh, I got a police siren. That'll work. What? Ooh, right. Right. But there's that's all downstream of a 70-year-old psychological theory built in originally to explain riots and lynch mobs. Now, here's my lamest block. Yeah, Steve, here's the lamest block. And Tony, I got you, bro. I got you, right? Because lamest block matters, right? So here's the lamest block. Let's strip the jargon away, right? And talk about de-individuation, right? In that theory. And it says that you put a person in a group and the real them gets buried, right? The group takes the will. That idea is so old and so deeply baked into Western storytelling that it feels like common sense. It is not common sense. It is a 1950 laboratory hypothesis that television and movies turned into cultural law without anybody checking if the hypothesis actually held up, right? Did you hear what I just said? Right? Listen, did it hold up? No. And that's the pivot for tonight, because it didn't hold up. Not the way the myth needs to, right? Not the way the myth needed it to. But, and look, the theory, it got built. The theory got famous. The theory got absorbed into every story we tell about connected minds, network consciousness, brain-to-brain interfaces, the whole architecture we've been building across this arc. And the theory has spent the last 3 decades getting quietly dismantled by the same field that created it. The dismantling is where we're headed, right? Not in some future episode, but tonight, right? Me, myself, and I, as the final boss, I don't build doctoral content on top of a myth nobody fact-checked. The merge doesn't get to stand on a foundation that collapsed under its own creator's scrutiny, right? This is, look, man, we got receipts. We got the receipts. We have the receipts, right? The meta-analysis that took de-individuation theory and ran it through 40 years of accumulated data, right? We have that. You need to hear what happened when the actual evidence got counted. So stay with me, right? Stay with me, right? So let's start with 1998. Because in 1998, researchers Tom Postmus and Russell Spears ran a meta-analysis on de-individuation research. A meta-analysis means you don't run one new study. You gather every study that's already been done on a question and you analyze the combined weight of all of them together. That's the strongest form of evidence a field can produce on a contested claim. Now, listen to this. The verdict on de-individuation theory is the psychological processes the theory proposed were not empirically sound. They were inconsistent evidence for the role an enemy was supposed to play, right? There was virtually no evidence for the central claim, the actual psychological state of de-individuation. The loss of self entire theory depends on, right? Now, think about it. Think about that, right? I want you to sit with that. The foundational science behind every hive mind cautionary tale you've ever absorbed failed its own meta-analysis. 40 years of data, and you lose yourself in the group mechanism could not be confirmed, right? It couldn't be confirmed, right? But it gets sharper because researchers working from a competing framework, a social identity theory, went back into the data and found something the opposite direction of total collapse. People in group settings weren't losing their identity. They were shifting it, moving from a personal identity to individual self, to a collective identity. The self as a member of the group. Same person, different lens activated, not erasure, but reallocation, right? Now, that's not a small correction. That's a complete reversal of the claim. The group doesn't switch you off. The group switches you from frame of reference. Get it? Frame of reference. You're still in there, fully intact, running the show, and you're just temporarily prioritized a different identity category than your usual default, right? Now, look, here's my layman's block. Here's my layman's block, right? Here's my layman's block. So imagine you at work versus you at your kid's birthday party. Same brain, same self, different identity, active depending on context, right? And nobody calls that losing yourself when it happens at the office or the party. The de-individuation researchers eventually had to admit that structurally, the same thing happening in crowds and groups. It's the same thing, right? A shift in which identity you were running, not a deletion of self underneath it, right? This is the uncomfortable verdict that's buried inside the academic literature. Almost nobody outside the field knows it exists. The science that built the hive mind myth turned around and disproved its own premise. The fear got you living in fiction, right? The fear did not survive in the data. It didn't survive, right? So you ask yourself, so here's where season 4, the rebirth, enters the realm, right? And earns its name, right? Because rebirth isn't becoming someone new by deleting who you were. Rebirth is the same self, shifting which identity it's running, serving contact with something bigger than it used to operate inside of. That's not destruction. That's exactly what the social identity researchers found happening in crowds for 70 years. And nobody noticed it was a feature, not a failure, right? So we're going to look at this directly. And we're going to look at it directly to the network itself, because theory and lab crowds are one thing. But what happens when the connection is literal? Brain to brain, machine in the middle. That's where the myth gets its real test, right? That's where it gets its real test. So, as we stated earlier, in 2019, a research team built something called BrainNet, right? First multi-person, non-invasive brain direct brain-to-brain interface for collaborative problem solving ever demonstrated, right? Stay with me. Don't you go nowhere, right? 3 human subjects, no surgery, EEG to read brain signals out, right? Transcranial magnetic stimulation on delivery signals back into a person's brain, right? Now here's the setup. Here's the setup because it matters, right? 2 subjects called senders watch a Tetris-style game and silently decided whether a block needs to rotate. Their brain signals decoded in real time and transmitted over the internet directly into the brain of a third subject, the receiver, right? Who cannot see the game at all. The receiver gets the sender's decisions delivered straight into their visual cortex through magnetic stimulation and has to act on information that arrived from someone else's mind. 5 separate groups ran this experiment. Average accuracy was 81.25%. Functional brain-to-brain collaboration. No scalpel required, right? Now, here's the part that obliterates the entire hive mind myth on contact, right? Because researchers deliberately injected the nose into one sender signal, making the sender less reliable than the other. What happened to the receiver? Did the receiver dissolve into some merged collective judgment, blindly averaging both inputs into a single hive output? The answer is no. The answer is no. The receiver learned which sender to trust. The receiver individual judgment, sitting downstream of two literal incoming brain signals, evaluated reliability and weighted the inputs accordingly. Man, that's amazing, right? The same way you will learn to trust a more reliable source in any normal social network, right? So here's my latest block. Right? So, all right, Steve, Tony, I got you guys. Derek, I see you. Alicia, I see you. Listen, latest block, right? Translate this, right? Let's translate this. If you could translate my lamest block into your lamest block into somebody else's lamest block, man, we win it, right? We win it. So a person had two other people's decisions beamed directly into their brain. And instead of losing their own judgment in the process, they used their own judgment to figure out which input deserved more weight. The self didn't get drowned. The self got busy doing exactly what serves what we do, right? Evaluating, discriminating, choosing. The research team's own conclusion called this a step toward a social network of brains. And a social network, by definition, is made of distinct nodes that retain their own identity, right? A network with no individual nodes left isn't a network. It's static, right? It's static. So, and this is the proof point, right? This is the proof point that Merge has been building toward across this entire arc, right? Because direct brain-to-brain transmission, the closest thing science has built to fictional mind hive or hive mind, did not produce a hive mind. It produced individuals making individual judgments about information arriving from outside themselves, which is what every brain has been doing your entire life. Every time someone talked to you, connection delivered information. Connection did not delete the chooser, right? Now, we're going to go back one more layer in a few minutes, right? And I want you to know that this is why you shouldn't even, what I'm talking about shouldn't even surprise you. Because the architecture of human cognition was rigged for this exact outcome long before any interface existed, right? So let's get to it. Hey, if you're still with me, to my smarts, to my motivators, to my warriors, to my final bosses, man, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, man. I appreciate you guys, man. I really do, right? I really do, man. Thank you for being here, man. You guys always showing up, right? So let's get to it. Here's a concept that should have killed the hive mind myth decades before BrainNet even got built. And that's called transactive memory, right? Transactive memory, write it down, right? Transactive memory. The idea developed in psychology is simple and devastating to the myth. Human memory was never designed to be a solo storage unit. A huge portion of what you know isn't stored in your mind at all. It's stored in your awareness of who else knows it or where to find it, right? You don't memorize every fact your spouse knows, your coworker knows, your doctor knows. You memorize the address. You know who to ask. That's a transactive memory system. Every functioning human relationship runs on that very exact thing, man, right? Y'all knew that, right? Y'all knew that. So let's keep going. Right? The internet supercharged this into something researchers now describe directly as a hive mind. In the literal psychological sense of the term, it's this. a vast, accessible, collective knowledge base that you tap into consistently without ever feeling like you've lost your individual identity in the process. You Google something. You didn't dissolve into Google, right? Come on, man. Don't do that to me. You extend your reach using a tool the exact same way your brain extends its reach into other people, right? And here's my language block, right? Here's my language block. So you've been merged with a collective intelligence system since the first time you asked your mom where something was instead of remembering it yourself. That's a transactive memory. That's distributed cognition in its most basic human form, running since childhood, and you never once worried it would dissolve your sense of self, right? Nobody panics that Google search erased that personality. The panic only shows up when the word hive mind gets attached to the exact same mechanism with a scarier label, right? And this is the uncomfortable verdict building underneath everything that we're talking about tonight, right? And I'm going to say it straight to you, man, straight to your face, right? You are already a node in a distributive cognitive network. You have been your entire life. The fear isn't about whether you get connected. You already are, right? You already are. The fear is about whether the connection will be visible, formalized, named, right? Think about it. And right now, it's invisible. So it doesn't scare you. The moment it becomes a technological architecture with a label like consciousness internet, the exact same structural relationship suddenly reads as an existential threat. That, my friends, that's not science driving the fear. That's framing driving the fear, right? And framing is exactly the kind of thing sovereignty architecture exists to correct, right? I need to get into this framework, man. I need y'all to understand this, right? And I owe you a cost confession. So it's coming, right? Of course, cost confessions have a real number, a real name, and no theory, right? And what staying disconnected actually costs. And I'm talking about me. So let's get into the cost confession. Somebody send me a message. Send me a message. Let's see. Okay. So I spent 23 years inside a federal structure built to keep information compartmentalized by design, right? I was a branch chief for the Department of Defense, right? Joint Force Headquarters. The job ran on the opposite premise of everything we just covered tonight, right? Knowledge stayed siloed, right? Connection stayed restricted. And need to know was the entire architecture on purpose for security reasons that made sense inside that mission. But here's the number, right? 23 years building expertise that lived almost entirely inside compartments other people couldn't access. And I couldn't fully access theirs either. And that's 2 decades plus of distributed cognition deliberately blocked at an institutional level, not because connection was dangerous, but because the system was built before anybody trusted connection to stay secure, right? And I left that institution, right? And I built Saturday Digital Networks, right? And I built the Final Boss podcast, and I built the Sovereignty Stack. Now, every one of those things is an experiment in whether connection, done with the right architecture underneath it, produces something stronger than isolation ever did, right? The cost of staying siloed wasn't abstract. It was 23 years of expertise that couldn't fully compound across a network because the network was built to prevent exactly that. I'm not running the experiment twice. The rebirth means building a connection versus not versus, but on building the connected version. That's the word I'm looking for. Version on purpose, with sovereignty engineered inside of it from the foundation, inside of the compartmentalization, engineered in as the only defense available, right? Where's my explosions, man? I'm a hype, man. I'm hype on the merger Wednesdays, man. Listen. That's it, man. That's the confection. Now let's get back to the architecture, right? I love it, man. I love it. Right? Nice. Not every connected mind structure works the same way. And this distinction matters more than anything else tonight. Because if you think about it, fiction usually gives you one flavor. It's we've talked about it. The centralized hive. There's a queen or overmind dictating to drones who've lost independence entirely, right? That's the version that built the fear. But theorists of group minds have long recognized that it isn't the only architecture possible, right? That's the second model. There's a second model, I'm sorry. Sometimes called a egalitarian group mind, right? Where members connect and share perception of or cognition while retaining full individual agency, identity, and decision-making authority. Connected, but not subordinated, right? Linked, but not overwritten, right? The honeybee hive itself, the literal biological origin of the term hive mind, runs closer to this second model than the fictional version that borrowed its name. Because bee colonies make collective decisions, like where to relocate the hive. Through something close to it's similar to like a voting process, right? Individual bees signaling preferences through behavior, and the majority pattern wins. The system depends on high diversity among individual bees to function well. A hive of identical, right? Well, will-less drones will make worse decisions, not better ones, right? You got bad apples in every pie. And the biological hive mind needs individuality in that to work, right? Intact to work. So here's my layman's block. The word hive mind, right, got hijacked by its scariest possible interpretation, right? And it's the centralized one, right? It's the one that you see on TV, right? The one where individuality gets erased on purpose, but the actual biological system the term comes from, the egalitarian model theories describe in connected human cognition, both require individual agency to survive. Erase the individuals and you don't get a smarter hive, you get a broken one, right? And this is the architecture decision sitting underneath the entire sovereignty stack. And I want it on record at the doctoral level tonight, right? Because the merge is not building toward a centralized overmind. It is building toward an egalitarian connected consciousness architecture where sovereignty at the individual node is not a bug, but what's to be engineered out of it, right? It is the load-bearing requirement the entire system depends on to function, right? You don't connect people by deleting what makes them distinct contributors. You connect them by building infrastructure that lets distinct contributors stay distinct while operating at a scale none of them could actually reach alone, right? And look, man, we're going to go philosophical on them in a few minutes, right? We're going to go philosophical, right? Because the philosophy underneath all of this is this, right? The fear of losing the self assumes there's a fixed singular self sitting there to lose in the first place. That's not how it works. That assumption has its own 300-year-old problem, man. Look, that was my layman's block. Steve, Tony, Eric, Derek, Erica, Alicia, I hope y'all got that, man. I hope all of y'all got that, right? Let me see who's watching on Instagram. I got Game Over, Alberto, Griff, and is that Mrs. Cheyenne Soccer? Okay, I got you. Okay, all right. That was the layman's block. So let's continue. 18th century, right? Let's talk about 18th century. Philosopher David Hume looked inward, searching for the unified consciousness self everyone assumes they have, and reported back that he couldn't find it, right? What he found instead was a bundle. And here's the bundle. It was a bundle of perceptions, experiences, impressions, one following another, after another, right? none of them a fixed central thing called self. That was the perceptions that belonged to the individual, right? The unity you feel isn't a discovered fact about your mind, it's a construction your mind generates on top of that very bundle, right? And this is a psychological landmine sitting underneath the entire hive mind myth. And almost nobody brings it into the conversation because the fear says this: if I connect to a network, I'll lose my unified self. But the unified self the fear is trying to protect was never the solid, right? Singular object the fear assumes is this, right? It was always a bundle. It always was. It was always construction. Always something closer to a process than a possession, right? Contemporary philosophy of mind extended this directly because some neuroscientists and psychologists now argue explicitly that human minds are far less centralized than intuition suggests. That the felt sense of a single unified I running the show is closer to a useful illusion than a literal actual fact about the brain. Multiple competing processes, multiple subsystems, multiple things generating the experience of unity after the fact rather than starting from it, right? And here's my latest block. You think you're protecting your fortress. Philosophy and neuroscience together suggest you're actually protecting a story your brain tells about a parade. The parade was never one solid object marching by. It was always individual floats, individual processes that your mind narrates into a single continuous procession because that narration is useful for planning, memory, and identity. Connection doesn't threaten a fortress that doesn't exist. Connection adds floats to a parade that was always made of floats, right? Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound familiar? That's like people breaking something, then fixing it, and then say, hey, I fixed what was broken, but it was never broken, right? It was never broken. So here's the doctoral level framework, right? Because the merge is contributing to this conversation. If the self was already a bundle, stay with me, right? Already a construction, stay with me, right? Already a story generated across distributed processes, stay with me, right? Then formal technological connection isn't introducing a new threat to a previously solid thing. It's extending a process that was the actual nature of selfhood the entire time. The fear assumed a solid object. The philosophy and the neuroscience both say they was not one to begin with, right? Look, the construction argument, yeah, I'm going to show you the mechanism. I'm going to show you the mechanism that makes construction stable even while it's being extended. Because if the self is a story, the question becomes, who's still writing it? Who is still writing it, right? Lane's block. So, right? If the self is a bundle, a construction, a process rather than a fixed object, you need a mechanism that explains why it still feels stable, continuous, and unmistakably yours. Philosophy of mind has a name for this mechanism, and it's called the narrative center of gravity, right? The self isn't a physical thing located somewhere in the brain. It's the organizing point of a stream of experience that gets told around. The way a center of gravity isn't a physical object inside a shape, but the point all the physical mass of that shape behaves as if it's organized around that thing, right? And here's why the distinction matters for tonight's argument specifically, right? Because a center of gravity doesn't get destroyed by adding more mass to the system. I'm talking math and physics right now. It moves, it recalculates, it stays a coherent organizing point for whoever shape the system currently has, including a bigger one, right? Add a connected node, add a transactive memory partner, add a brain-to-brain interface, add a consciousness internet endpoint, and the narrative center of gravity that organizes your experience doesn't shatter on contact. It relocates and recalculates around a larger shape. The same way it's been recalculating your entire life every time you learn something new, met someone new, or extended your memory into someone else's expertise, right? And this is the technical core of why the hive mind fails under examination. The myth assumes identity is a container that overflows and breaks when too much gets added. The narrative center of gravity model stays and says identity. Identity is an organizing process, right? That scales with the system it's organizing. The same way your sense of self doesn't break when you learn to read, when you learn the language, or when you learn to trust a colleague's judgment over your own and their area of expertise. Now, here's my language block, right? Listen, smarts, motivators, warriors, final bosses. Look, man, you are not a cup that overflows with connection, gets poured in, right? You are the story your brain keeps telling about whatever it is that you're currently flowing through, right? And the story has been getting more complex, more connected, more distributed your entire life without ever once breaking, right? Marriage didn't dissolve your identity. Parenthood didn't dissolve your identity. Both of those relationships rewired what you pay attention to and how you make decisions more dramatically than most brain-to-brain interface research has even tried to manage, right? The narrative kept up. It always does. That's its job, right? This is the doctoral contribution, sovereignty architecture, and it's making it to the field tonight because identity persistence under network expansion isn't a problem to be solved with new technology. It's the process the brain has been running successfully since before language existed. The technology doesn't introduce a new vulnerability. It tests a system that was built for exactly this kind of scaling from day one, right? Now, you take all 5 of these bullet points and the empirical collapse, the brain-to-brain proof, the transactive memory baseline, the Igaga mind, right? Architecture, and the narrative center of gravity. And I weld them into formal frameworks. There's a contribution to the merge, and that's what we're talking about, right? That's why we're here. That's why we are here. So, original contribution, right? Because a version that I'm going to call the identity persistence layer, right? And it's going to sit as the sovereignty protected mechanism underneath every other layer of the consciousness internet architecture that this arc has been building. Because identity persistent layer makes 4 claims, each one low bearing, each one backed by tonight's research, right? And claim number 1 is this. Claim number 1 is this. De-individuation premise underneath the hive mind myth failed its own meta-analysis. Connection does not empirically produce loss of self. It produces identity shift, personal to collective framing with the underlying self fully intact, right? Fully intact. And here's claim number 2, right? Here's claim number 2. Direct brain-to-brain interfacing. The closest real technology has come to the fictional hive mind. Produces individual judgment operating on incoming distributed information, not merged, undifferentiated cognition. The receiver and brain net stayed a discriminating individual node throughout, right? And here's claim number 3. Humans have run informal versions of network cognition, transactive memory, and they've done these things their entire life without identity collapse. Yeah, we have, right? Being distributed cognition wasn't anything new. Formal technological connection extends an existing capacity rather than introducing a foreign threat. And here's claim number 4, right? The self being protected by the fear was never a fixed object to begin with. It is a narrative center of gravity, an organized process that recalculates around expanding systems rather than breaking under them. The same way it has recalculated around every relationship, skill, and piece of borrowed expertise a person accumulates over the experience of their normal life, right? So, here's my language block. 4 proofs, 1 verdict. The thing you're afraid the network would take from you was never sitting still, waiting to be taken. It was already moving, already distributed, already built to expand. The network doesn't threaten the process, the network gives the process more to work with. This is why sovereignty architecture refuses the centralized overmind model on principle, not preference. An architecture that erased individual identity nodes would be building against the grain of every mechanism that makes human cognition function in the first place. The identity persistence layer isn't a feature added on top of the consciousness internet for comfort. It's a description of how identity already works, formalized into the engineering requirement that any sovereignty respected connected consciousness system was an honor to be a part of from the get with, from the beginning, right? Now, we're going to test this against the several versions, right, of objection. Because somebody listening right now is thinking, well, fine, slow gradual connection doesn't dissolve identity. But what about total, instant, complete merger, right? That's the version we have to face directly. And that was the layman's block. So let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about it. Let's take the hardest version of fear head on, right? Because dodging it would be intellectually dishonest at the doctoral level, right? Because the strangest form of the hive mind myth isn't gradual connection. It's complete instant total merger, the fictional version where every linked mind becomes fully aware of every other linked mind, full internal state simultaneously with no boundary left between them at all, right? That's the model science fiction usually means by hive mind in its purest form, right? Most totalizing form, as a matter of fact, right? With complete integration. Every member's perception accessible to every other member's at once. But here's the honest answer. Here's the honest answer. Doctoral level and unflinching answer, right? Nothing in current neuroscience, current brain-to-brain interface research, or current network architecture proposes building toward that totalizing version. And nothing in the sovereignty architecture roadmap does either. BrainNet transmitted a single binary decision between 3 people through painstaking signal decoding and magnetic stimulation. That is where, no, that is nowhere close to full internal state transparency between minds. The gap between share a discrete piece of decoded information and fully merge internal experience is not a small engineering step. It is a difference in kind, not degree, right? And that matters because the myth conflates 2 completely different architectures and asks you to fear them as if they're one. Connected cognition, sharing information, judgment, memory, access across distinct individual nodes is the model every piece of tonight's research supports and the model sovereignty architecture is built on. Totalized merger, the complete dissolution of boundaries between minds, isn't what the actual science is building. It's what the brain net demonstrated. And it's what the consciousness internet architecture in this arc has proposed at any point across 26 episodes, right? 26 episodes, man. So, I don't need to do a lens block on that, right? Y'all good? Y'all good? Okay. We're gonna keep. I'm trying to end on time, right? So think about this. Sovereignty architecture in network consciousness system runs on 5 vectors framework. And those 5 vectors framework are neural, genetic, cognitive, network, and emergent. Tonight's episode sits primarily on the emergent vector with cognitive and networks as direct supporting vectors. And here's the formal placement for the for something I'm working on, right? The emergent vector. The claim that identity persistence is itself and an emergent property of distributed cognitive systems, not a fragile property that exists only on or in isolated individual minds, gets destroyed by connection. Tonight's evidence, the empirical collapse of de-individuation theory, the brain net discrimination findings, the transactive memory baseline, all support classifying identity persistence as something that emerges robustly across connected systems rather than something that exists only in isolation and degrades, pay attention, under connection. We're almost done, man. We're almost done, right? Cognitive vector directly inherited from last week's Merger 25 finding that cognition was never solely an individual brain process. Tonight extends the claim from cognition specifically to identity generally. If thinking was always distributed and identity is generated by a narrative process organizing that thinking, identity inherits the distributed structure of the cognition is built from, right? And then there's a network vector, right? The egalamind architecture distinction, right? That's connection without subordination. Individual nodes retaining full agency inside a connected system becomes the formal engineering requirement for any consciousness internet implementation. Sovereignty architecture endorses it going forward, right? I'm gonna go over it a little bit, man. Stay with me, man. Stay with me. Stay with me. Don't go nowhere, right? Stay with me, right? So, season 4, it's called The Rebirth for a Reason. And that lands directly on tonight's topic, right? And I want to be explicit instead of it being buried, right? The final bosses, warriors, motivators, and smarts. Listen, rebirth gets misread constantly as destruction followed by replacement. Burn down who you were, build someone new from the ashes. That's the version of rebirth that scares people because it sounds exactly like the hive mind myth. Lose the self, get something else instead. But that's not what rebirth actually means. And it's definitely not what tonight's research supports. Real rebirth is the narrative center of gravity recalculating around a bigger shape. It's the same self, but expanded, right? Not deleted, and definitely not replaced. It's the receiver in BrainNet, still making individual judgments, now with more information available to judge. It's 23 years of compartmentalized federal expertise finally connected to a network of podcasts, books, a doctoral architecture, a company, instead of staying siloed behind clearance levels. The self that built DigiNet is the same self that survived the Pentagon on 9/11. Connection added the scope. It didn't perform a substitution, right? And this the lens every episode in season 4 has ran through. And tonight is no tagline. It's the literal conclusion of the research. The rebirth means building bigger without becoming someone else in the process. The myth told you those two things were the same. Tonight's evidence of what I just told you says that they've never been the same thing at all. Thank you very much. Right? Thank you very much. Right? And before we close, man, look, I'm going to give you the uncomfortable verdict before we close. And here's the loop. And it's closed, right? I asked you in a segment in the beginning, if connection isn't what destroys the self, what actually was? And the answer backed by 70 years of research that started by trying to prove the opposite. Isolation never protected a self. It just hid the fact that the self was always distributed, always a network, always a story running across more than one mind, one relationship, one borrowed piece of expertise. Connection didn't introduce the threat. Connection exposed a process that was already running and gave it a name scary enough to make you afraid of something you've been doing safely your entire life. And here's the uncomfortable verdict. And this is something I want you to sit with before you share it, right? You already lost the version of self you've been trying to protect. Isolation didn't preserve it. Isolation just replaced it with a fake one, smaller, quieter, and easier to defend. Because a self that never connects to anything is also a self that never gets tested by anything. Damn, that boy good. Man, that boy good, right? That boy good. Listen. The hive mind myth was never really a warning about technology. It was a permission slip for staying small. 70 years of de-individuation research collapsed under its own meta-analysis. And the myth survived anyway, because the myth was never doing scientific work. It was doing emotional work, giving people a respectable signing reason to avoid the exact kind of connection that's been quietly building who they are since the day they were born. You don't lose yourself in a network, people. You lose the excuse for staying out of one. That's the verdict. Doctoral level, evidence backed and built to be repeated outside this room. Booyah! Right? Boo, yeah. Now, as we close, this is a merger that I'm getting out of here on time. And look, as we close, man, smarts, motivators, warriors, final bosses, man. Look, I do this for you guys, man, and I enjoy it, right? This and this is what construction looks like at the doctoral level, right? Not motivation architecture, right? But 26 episodes deep into year one, and tonight we didn't just discuss the fear. We traced it back to its origin. We ran it through its own field of meta-analysis, tested against literal brain-to-brain interface data, and replaced it with a framework you can build a life on, right? To my smarts, running the numbers on this right now, the data was always public. Nobody reads anymore. And nobody read it because the myth was easier to believe. The final boss is building something bigger than yourself right now. Tonight's episode is your permission to slip. The real one backed by evidence instead of fear, right? And to my motivators carrying people through their own version of this fear, you now have 70 years of research to hand them instead of pep talk. To the warriors who already know what it costs to stay compartmentalized for too long, you heard the confession tonight. 23 years, and I'm not running that experiment twice, and neither should you, right? And neither should you. So, next Wednesday, Merger 27, episode, I don't know what episode number is going to be. I think it's going to be 268, right? We're going to go further into the Merger Wednesdays Arc 4 distributed consciousness, man, and the question of being functionally present in two places at once. Tonight built the proof that the connection doesn't dissolve identity, and next week's test what identity does when it's stretched across more than one location simultaneously. This is the Merger Wednesdays, and this is the Final Boss podcast. I am the Final Boss. I am here. We are here. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Man, as we close, man, as we close. Let me get a drum roll for you real quick. Boom. Boom. That's all, folks. That's all, folks. And if I don't see you again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show. And as always, there's a heavy pain that comes with discipline, but there's an even heavier pain that comes with regret. I am here. We are here. And, don't gatekeep. Like, share, subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. be balanced, be equal, and be smart. That's our show for tonight, man. Y'all have a good one. I will see you again tomorrow for a town hall. We're going to do a town hall tomorrow for special guests. Thursdays. Tune in tomorrow night at 9 p.m. live for the town hall. 11 individuals, 11 concerns, 11 questions. All in chairs, all on this show tomorrow night for the town hall. See you then. Y'all have a great one. Talk to you soon. Good night.
It's Merger Wednesday. The countdown continues. 7 years until the convergence of biology and machine. Neural interfaces are no longer theory. They're the scaffolding of a new consciousness. But what does that mean for identity? For free will, for the soul? This is where we build the frameworks for ethical, philosophical, and spiritual growth for the next phase of human evolution. We're not just upgrading hardware. We're rewriting what it means to be human. Each week, we explore the biotech breakthroughs, decode the cognitive shifts, and prepare the mind for the merge. This isn't about fear, it's about readiness. Because the future isn't waiting. It's already wiring in. This is about preparing human consciousness for the most significant leap in our species' history. If you think this is just about chips and brains, you're not ready. But we'll get you there, one Wednesday at a time. So sit back and relax as we take you on a journey on Merger Wednesday.